Chapter 5 Coke Addiction, Pill Poppers, and Police Officers. The first thing I did after Lisa gave me the apartment was invite Michael to come live with me. It was a decent place in a bad neighborhood, and we had our 21st and 22nd birthdays there. Lisa let me keep Javier's clothes and furniture, and we were still good friends. Janet and Jonathan didn't ever visit my apartment. Benny only came over a handful of times. Once somebody had a particular image of you in their head, no matter how inaccurate, they don't like to see things which don't match up with the story of you that they made up in their head. This was the part of my life working as a telemarketer which was less memorable than the other parts. Most days blend together to create a monochrome montage of random tidbits of images and memories with no semblance of order. This is how most people live their entire lives. After 6 months, I realized I needed a way out of telemarketing. The 9 to 5 thing wasn't working. I'd sell a lot of newspaper subs, and management loved that, but my heart wasn't in it. Spending most of my workday daydreaming about being a homeless vagabond, a full-time college student, or just about anything other than a telemarketer. I had a long-term goal of higher education, but I was in the telemarketing world that was banal and plagued. I was their top salesman, but I loathed my position. For 8 hours a day, I talked to people on the phone while put in a trance by the ancient computer screens and its arbitrary phone numbers with unfamiliar area codes. One way I kept myself distracted was by making sure I always had pen and paper on me. If I wasn't daydreaming, I'd be sketching doodles, poetry, or sappy song lyrics, anything to remind me of life beyond jail. I was anxious, being 22 and hadn't ever set foot in a college classroom. The more I worked at my telemarketing job, the more my academic goals faded. Some people had been stuck selling papers there for years. There were a few shabbily dressed seniors who'd been working the phones for decades. Management belittled them every chance they got, usually making fun of their clothes or noticeable odor of cat piss. Most employees were from the poor parts of town. The office had a central location near a lot of bus routes. If you wanted a job, you could get it the same day. They hired felons, pregnant teens, and elderly spinsters just happy to get away from the cats for a few hours. A few misguided college students occasionally wandered in, answering a 2-line ad in the classified section of the paper, but they never lasted. It was only a matter of time before I found a way to split on the system. We got a 30-minute lunch break, so after my second day, I started going home and smoking an enormous amount of weed in a brief period of time. Benny and I used to call it power smoking. It mellowed me out just enough to sell papers and not despise the rest of my day. Soon I started to invite a bunch of weed-smoking coworkers back to my place for lunch. Within a month, half the office was smogging out my living room. Someone always asked if I knew where to get weed, so it didn't take long before I became the official office weed dealer. I was a generous dealer with plenty of business. Most of my customers were people I worked with, but I sold a few bags to my old neighborhood friends too. Dealing small amounts of marijuana was one of the most productive things I did in poverty. I didn't have a car, so I'd usually pay someone to drive across town to pick up about a pound per week. Michael wasn't busy at the time, so he'd watch the stash and make any necessary transactions when I was gone. I kept my business tidy, separating every big bag I bought into dimes, quarters, and ounces. After I had everything weighed and bagged, I put them in a mini fridge to keep them fresh. Whenever someone came over, I'd pop open the fridge and let them choose whichever bag they wanted. I even made little price tags with colored construction paper. Things were going good until a coke dealer moved in next door. Her name was Inez, and she was about business. She was almost my age, but looked a lot older, a mother of 3 with one on the way. Her tots were constantly circling her ankles, yelling out demands. Each of them had a different father, but shared the same bleak future. The day she moved in, I told her I sold weed, and she told me she dealt coke. A bond was formed, and it wasn't long before we were trading customers. Her clients didn't know where to get good bud, and my friends didn't know where to score decent blow. I didn't think much of the consequences. I was just implementing good business practices. I'm going to take a pause right there. The book I'm reading is Gonzo Education. It's a book that I wrote. I'm really proud of it. I'm going through it. It's probably like 97% of the way done. There's one word here or there that can be changed, but like as I'm reading it, I'm kind of noticing that. I don't have a pen around, so I can't really change it. So. But right now it's available free on Kindle, so I encourage you to go and get your own copy of it. There's a lot of really cool information in here that I'm not disclosing, and this is one of the first of a series of 3 books. Feel free to check out my other channel, and don't forget to give this a thumbs up. I didn't have a car, so I'd usually pay someone to drive across town to pick up pounds each week. The day Inez moved in, I told her I sold weed, and she told me she dealt coke. Okay. One day, a weed customer came over without any cash. He had a small bag of coke and wanted to trade. It was Sunday morning, I was off work, and I had nothing to do and no one coming over, so I hesitantly took the powder and gave him a dime back, figuring I'd trade it later. I held the bag to the light and noticed it was decorated with purple peace symbols. This gave the deadly substance an aura of innocence. I'd see the harm coke can do and promised myself never to get involved, but I'd done it a few times before and never once felt the least bit addicted. I decided to watch Pulp Fiction to give me some time to think it over, but by the time Christopher Walken pulls the watch out, I'd already snorted half the bag and was debating on getting more. When the movie ended, I put on the college radio station to distract myself, but in doing so, I discovered a weekly Beatles program that I hadn't ever heard before. The Beatles are my favorite band, so I saw this as a sign to get more cocaine. I couldn't have picked better circumstances to be addicted. I had cash, I was bored with being a telemarketer, and I lived next to a coke dealer. When Monday morning came, I surprisingly didn't feel that bad. It wasn't anything worse than a hangover. At work, I had more energy and a secret that nobody knew. It gave me something to look forward to on my day off. I figured that as long as I kept my habit at weekly intervals, I wouldn't get hooked. I didn't crave the stuff during the week, but I counted the days before I could snort cocaine by myself with candles, mirrors, and the Beatles radio show. Every Sunday would be a religious service in my living room, but the only one in attendance was me. Cocaine makes a user bold, emotional, and creative. When I wasn't shoving powder up my nose, but high on cocaine, I'd write psychedelic poetry or detailed letters to celebrities, politicians, and friends I hadn't spoken to in years. One weekend, I bought 2 VCRs and made an epic montage of classic film clips, old school cartoons, and Attenborough wildlife videos. Another time, I made a one-person play on my answering machine to entertain callers. My friends couldn't believe how talented I was. Cocaine may have not been the answers to my problems, but it got me off my ass and motivated me to actually start doing things. It wouldn't last, so I started asking around the office to see if anyone knew about financial aid for college, but most people that worked there hadn't ever been close to a college before. That's why I was happily surprised when a smiley college kid who just moved to Texas with his family from South Dakota started working the phones next to mine. His name was John Hershey, and he was going to community college for years before I met him at the telemarketing office. John and his gang of stoner friends started off as regular pot customers, but after a few weeks my apartment became their official hangout spot. They used it to do drugs, watch TV, and listen to music. I didn't tell Hershey and his friends about my coke habit. I kept it a secret and preferred to do it alone. I did other drugs with them, like mushrooms and MDMA. They still live with their parents, so even though they said I was the coolest person they ever met, I knew they were just using me because I had my own place and sold weed. My coke addiction wasn't expensive at first. It started out at just $20 every few days for the first couple weeks, but after a month it doubled. I made good money selling weed and I was still working full time, so I let having a couple bucks in the bank be my excuse to do more coke. My productivity at work actually improved. I was more aggressive selling papers and coworkers began listening to me. It's like cocaine activated the dominant lion part of my brain that had been asleep. I was more productive outside of work too. I expanded my marijuana business and bought twice as much pot every week. I also put together a weekly poker game which I dominated every time. I even convinced Michael to take over my post helping Lisa throw the newspaper. During a weed run one day, I spotted a used van for $900. Michael and I went over there and knocked on the door. The guy selling it was drunk and drove us around for an hour listening to a baseball game before finally giving us the keys. I bought it, but I hardly ever drove it. I'd still walk to it from work every day. Michael would drive it here and there, but it was mainly used for marijuana pickups. Every weekend, I'd pay someone $50 to drive it across town and pick up a pound of swag. Things were going well on the surface, but coke was eating my soul. I could keep up with my telemarketing job until they changed my shift from second to first. That meant that instead of coming in at noon every day, now I had to be there at 8 a.m. I'd gotten used to doing coke till the sun came up, sleeping a few hours, then jumping up and getting to work. One night I was doing lines until 6 a.m. There wasn't time to sleep, so I did a little more and stepped out the door to head to work. By the time I got there, I felt like the walking dead and the world looked like a rancid sack of pus. The last thing I felt like doing was selling newspaper subscriptions, and I had to run to the bathroom twice for nosebleeds. During lunch, I still went back to my apartment, but instead of smoking weed, I got out a metal spoon, some baking soda, a roll of foil, and an empty paper towel roll. After mixing the coke and baking soda on the spoon, I spit a couple drops of saliva on the sheet of foil. Then I took the powder mixture and made a paste-like batter covering one side of the sheet of foil. When I had the batter evenly distributed across the shiny side of the foil, I balanced it on top of my 27-inch TV, which was mute but playing a black and white Turner Classic movie. The sheet of foil was balanced on top of the television by two of the unusual bunny rabbit knickknacks I was collecting at the time. There was a slight breeze coming in through the window, and the sheet of foil was gently blowing in the wind. After I had the foil completely balanced, I shoved the empty toilet paper roll in my mouth, holding it there with my teeth. Then, with one hand, I held one side of the foil, and with the other hand, lit a flame under the bottom side of the foil. As the chemical-infested smoke slithered up one side of the toilet paper roll, through the roll, into my mouth, and down into my lungs, I went into a trance and stared at the black and white TV, high on crack. A few days later, I was in a bathtub trying not to pass out after a freebasing binge. My irregular heartbeat gets a little psycho during hardcore cocaine use. The condition has been giving me dizzy spells since I was a kid, usually happening when I stand up too quickly or immediately after an intense basketball game. It's a case of the oxygen not having time to get to my brain. However, I have never had a dizzy spell naked in a bathtub full of lavender-scented bubbles. I was in a tub high on crack with my life slipping away. Things went fuzzy, water went up my nose, and I could feel myself splashing around the tub, looking like Helen Keller asking for water. My dizzy spells are usually peaceful, like the feeling you get before you fall asleep. Your imagination fills your mind with millions of uncorrelated thoughts while your brain moves at light speed like a Rolodex made up of everything you recently saw, thought, or overheard. It's like someone telling you about their monumental day, but they're speaking gibberish in a non-linear narrative. I had to get the oxygen flowing back to my brain and before any brain damage set in, so I used what I had left to pull my naked body out of the casket and onto the moldy bathroom floor. I didn't go to work the next day. Other than 9/11, it was the first day I missed in 2 years. The manager called and tried to make me feel guilty. That wasn't happening. I quit right there over the phone. He called back 20 times before getting the message. I told him that a life away from cocaine was more important to me than selling shitty newspaper subscriptions. For the next 6 hours, I stared out the window, compared to usually staring at the computer screen at work. I didn't feel like looking for a new job. I didn't want to live in that apartment anymore. Most importantly, I refused to be a coke addict. I decided to ditch my apartment, job, and neighborhood. I had lived there for 2 years. It took about an hour to completely empty the place. I didn't pack much. Instead, I created a big mound of crap in the front yard. Whatever furniture I couldn't throw out my second-story window, I dragged downstairs and tossed into the pile. I was originally going to douse everything with gasoline and create a liberating inferno before realizing that would have caused much too much attention. I got in my van, put in a worn-down Tom Petty cassette tape, and headed toward freedom, leaving my addiction where I found it. I didn't have access to a rehab facility, but I knew the first step to sobriety is to avoid the influence. So I got on the freeway and drove slow in the right lane. An hour later, I found myself in the neighborhood I grew up in and pulled into the Target Superstore's parking lot. After a couple hours, I went inside Target and bought 4 plastic crates. I was going to take an inventory and organize my van. One crate I designated for camping equipment. Another was for tools and auto parts. A third crate was for entertainment. It had board games, a deck of cards, a basketball, football, and a mini racer scooter. The fourth crate was the most important, had all my photographs, journals, and dog-eared paperbacks I'd been collecting over the years. My van was clean and organized, but I still had no idea where to go. I'd recently been watching hours of ancient David Attenborough nature videos, and I figured being in the wild would be my best setting to beat this particular addiction. However, the only nature I could think of was a canyon lake, a man-made shithole off I-35 halfway between San Antonio and Austin. All right, that's from the book Gonzo Education, Chapter 5, Coke Addiction, Pill Poppers, and Police Officers. Right now, the main character, Gregory Brandt, he's recently quit his job and his cocaine addiction, and he's leaving San Antonio and driving to a place called Canyon Lake so he can be with nature and get his mind and get himself in order. This book, it's available on Kindle and also on Amazon. It's free on Kindle right now. You can find it under Gonzo Education by Gregory Brandt. It's also listed under Homeless College Student, also by Gregory Brandt. I encourage you to check out this book and also check out his other books and his other channels. All right, thank you.